Thanks for being with us on the fastest show in politics here on Bloomberg Radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube. We are live from Washington, where, the Fed is preparing its statement. We'll bring you special coverage starting 1:30 p.m. Washington time, as you would expect, here on Bloomberg TV and radio, with the decision, with the news conference. As we pick through results today from primary night last night in some pretty interesting states. And I'm going to start in South Carolina, where the question is, did Nancy Mace win or did Kevin McCarthy lose? I know it's easy to say both, but this is interesting. Nancy Mace, Republican from South Carolina, friend of Donald Trump, was one of the 8 Republicans to vote to oust Kevin McCarthy when he was Speaker. And so he turned his fire and money on her in a primary. And boy, she didn't have too much trouble easily defeating Catherine Templeton to get to the general. No runoff is coming in South Carolina. And so there are some questions about the power of incumbency versus the power of the former speaker, who's got a lot of money left in his pocket. And so let's assemble the panel for their take. It's not just South Carolina. We're going to look at Nevada as well, with some interesting findings to pick through. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us, Bloomberg politics contributors. Our signature panel in place this morning after, and Rick, as the Republican, I'll start with you. I'm curious your thoughts on the McCarthy effect and his potential to change outcomes as he puts his money to work in this campaign. What happened in South Carolina?
Well, as you said, he's going after the crazy eights, those guys who voted to kick him out of the speakership, and Nancy Mace was the first one on the list. And she handily won over 50%. That meant she didn't have to go into a runoff. And that was after McCarthy tried desperately to beat her. He spent over $2 million of PAC money against her on TV, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars for her opponent. He was all in. That being said, Nancy Mace is a survivor. We have to remember 2 years ago, Donald Trump tried to beat her. And so she turned away his effort to throw her out of Congress, just like she's turned away Kevin McCarthy's. And I think at this point, we're running out of enemies. It'd be interesting to see what happens in 2 years for her. But I'd say she gets the Survivor Award for the last 5 years.
Survivor Award. And did it help that she warmed up to Donald Trump in that time, Jeannie?
Absolutely. Let's face it, Donald Trump had a good night last night. And, his endorsement was very helpful to her. So I sort of think that Donald Trump won the night, if you will. But there's also the reality. It is really, really tough to beat an incumbent. We keep talking about how vulnerable incumbents are in the modern presidency. But in the modern Congress, they, to get one out of office is really, really tough. And so, she is an incumbent. I think in this election cycle, and I'll have to check this data, but I think there has been only one incumbent so far who has lost in a primary. I think, Rick, that's in Rick's state of Alabama, but it was an incumbent on incumbent race because of redistricting. I don't know of any others, but the bottom line is a very small number of incumbents have lost. And so that's also part of the story. So you couple Trump with an incumbent, that's a hard match to beat. And of course, Nancy Mace, she deserves credit. She pulled it through again.
That's for sure. Rick, take us to Nevada, where we had a really important primary here, Republican primary, to find out who's going to run against Senator Jackie Rosen, who many say is the most vulnerable Democrat in the Senate. A big one for, interesting to say this at once, the establishment and Donald Trump, as we've discussed. The former president came around on Republican Sam Brown, who was also backed by the NRSC. He had the establishment behind him, the mainstream candidate. It was a very late endorsement, though. Sam Brown blew the doors off. He won by 40 points or something here, Rick. Did Donald Trump just finally sense how big that win would be and put his chips in the right place?
Yeah, I think Donald Trump has been pretty disciplined this year. He has been supporting a lot of the mainstream candidates. I'd say Nancy Mace certainly is a good example of that. He could have, supported a challenger like he did 2 years ago, but she's fallen into line. Most of these others have. And Sam Brown, he's a guy who's going to be seen as a Trump pick. That being said, he's a pretty good candidate. He did really well, as you point out. But this is the really biggest incumbent race, I think, in the Senate for the Democrats. They really need Jackie Rosen to win. She didn't really have any opposition in her primary, and she stockpiled a lot of cash. She's got like $10 million cash on hand compared to just 2.5 for Sam Brown. But this is such an important race. I don't think money's going to make the difference because every outside group in America is going to show up in Nevada spending heavily to win this seat.
Well, and there are questions about the top of the ticket there, Jeannie. This is one of the states we look very closely at. Donald Trump was just there, as I mentioned last weekend. He's offering culinary workers, hospitality workers in Nevada to make their tips tax-free. What does Joe Biden do to answer this in an effort to help Jackie Rosen?
Well, I'm not sure him going out there is going to be much of a help to Jackie Rosen. I think she's going to be doing this pretty much on her own in spite of the top of the ticket. It's going to be a really, really close and tough race for her. She does have a lot of money. They are well organized, but she is not, she doesn't really have the name recognition that Cortez Masto had, and that gave an advantage in 22. She is a good candidate, but I think this is one where you don't have to look far to see that this is one that Democrats are desperate to hang on to and going to be one of the toughest for them to hold this year. And certainly a lot of more money is going to pour in there now that Republicans have, settled on who's going to be her opponent. And he is going to be a tough opponent. He's better than he was when he ran in the primary last time, for sure.
Mm-hmm. What does that say, Jeannie, about the most union-friendly president in American history? I thought if you won the culinary union on the Las Vegas Strip, you won the state. And now we're hearing about Donald Trump again in this case. Is this not a statement on organized labor?
It is. It's, we used to talk about like a tale of two cities, a tale of two states in some places. This is like a tale of two organizations, because at the top, you do see that continued old style support of a Democratic president who has done a lot for labor and has fancied himself the most labor friendly president. And yet, and the base, and you look at the numbers there, they are likely to go for Donald Trump. And, the reality is Donald Trump has fought hard as well for that base. I mean, he has really put himself out there to make that case. So he is not going to just let Joe Biden run away with it because he gets union endorsements. He's still fighting this out. So that's what's making this so tough. Not to mention, we're once again seeing in the Sun Belt, Donald Trump is doing better and Joe Biden is doing better in the Rust Belt. And of course, in this case, the union in the Sun Belt states are a problem for Joe Biden at the base level.
Well, this is really interesting because tomorrow Donald Trump is coming to Washington. He's not only going to be visiting with politicians, and he's got meetings in the House and the Senate. He's even going to apparently be in the same room as Mitch McConnell for the first time since 2020. That ought to be something. But he's going to be sitting down with the Business Roundtable, right? This is corporate America, 90 top CEOs in the same room. Apparently going to be interviewed by Larry Kudlow, so a friendly Rick. Donald Trump's message on business here. We're talking about the influence of the economy. We started this hour talking about CPI today. We're going to be going into Fed coverage coming out of our conversation next hour. How important is it for Donald Trump to convince that room for him to be a viable contender or to keep, in some cases, his lead over Joe Biden?
Yeah, I'm not sure how election impact this speech will be, but it will certainly have a way of opening up doors to money. And we, of course, have seen Donald Trump really working hard to get some cash in the bank because his campaign has been behind on its fundraising activities. And so whether small dollar donors coming in after the convictions or really large dollar Wall Streeters coming in, this is really going to be the primary focus. But it's going to be on issues, and he's going to talk about making those Trump 2017 tax cuts permanent. He's going to want to talk about reduction in regulations. To be honest, this is the sleeper issue, I think, of this election, because Joe Biden has not seen a regulation he didn't like, and his cost of regulation is over $1 trillion taxes to corporations, and Donald Trump actually reduced the amount of money that regulations have to commit to be able to maintain regulations during his presidency. So it is a stark contrast, and I think felt by corporate America, and probably will resound very well in his comments to the Business Roundtable.
Well, Jeannie, after President Trump appears, or I don't know what order they're going to go in, White House Chief of Staff Jeff Zients is going to be speaking to the group here on behalf of Joe Biden, who, of course, is on his way to the G7. Apparently, he'll be in a conversation moderated by one of the CEOs, not a former staffer in the case of Donald Trump. Is there any point in even going? What's he going to say?
You know, I think, first of all, the statement the Biden campaign, or the White House, not the campaign, released today on the inflation numbers is the best one I've seen so far from them. And I think they're starting to finally, maybe a little late for some of us, coalesce around a message, which is to stop trying to convince people that what they've done is good and they should be given credit for it, but to meet people where they are, which is prices are too high. And then to say, who are we going to be here for? And that is the middle class. And who are we blaming for prices, and who are we taking on? Big oil of the kind that Donald Trump was down there saying, you know, give me $1 billion, I'll get rid of all these, you know, regulations and all these environmental steps that Joe Biden has taken. So I don't know how far Zients will go in the roundtable making this case, but that is the case that the Biden team needs to keep making. They are finally starting to see that they can't talk people into liking how the economy is, but they can meet them where they are and say they know how to move forward, and that pin Donald Trump down as a friend of billionaires, CEOs, Wall Street. So I think Trump's visit there tomorrow is one the Biden team, at least the campaign, will want to highlight and say, look, this is who he is going to see. And thankfully, Joe Biden is out of town doing the work of the president, so he's not going to be attending.
Rick, I don't want to set you up. We've got less than a minute here, but does anyone in that room care about deficits? Will that be part of the conversation tomorrow?
Yeah, I think that it's a growing concern. I think that as we come out of all these impacts of things like COVID, and there's some stabilization of spending, that there's an expectation by groups like the Business Roundtable to start cutting back on the rate of growth of the deficit. I think they see, you know, never-ending deficits as a potential problem for the country long term.
Well, we're going to talk a lot more about this with our panel in our second hour, because this visit will reignite the debate over making the Trump tax cuts permanent. And we have a special guest with us in studio next hour. Former Congressman Kevin Brady of Texas, used to chair the Ways and Means Committee, will be sitting down with us coming up next. Stay right here on Bloomberg.